Good evening. 2 people have died in what the Metropolitan Police are describing as a terrorist incident on London Bridge. The attacker was later shot dead. Several members of the public managed to wrestle him to the ground, and their bravery has been widely praised. Police say the attack started here in Fishmongers Hall at the northern end of the bridge. Now, the alarm was raised just before 2 p.m. this afternoon. The attacker then appears to have moved onto the bridge, where he was tackled and disarmed amid some chaotic scenes. Police then arrive at 3 minutes past 2. That's 5 minutes after the first emergency call. Armed officers then fire 2 shots, killing the suspect, fearing he was wearing an explosives vest. Well, the Prime Minister, who's chairing a Cobra meeting in Downing Street right now, said earlier that any accomplices to the attack will be hunted down and brought to justice. While the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, praised what he called the breathtaking heroism shown by members of the public who tackled the suspect. Tonight, large parts of central London remain cordoned off, and there are extra police patrols on duty across the capital. Well, our correspondent Daniel Sanford is at the scene live for us tonight. Daniel.
Yes, Clive, once again a major bridge in central London is closed following a suspected terrorist attack which killed 2 people. Once again it involved knives and a fake bomb, and once again police had to kill the suspect. The attack started at Fishmongers Hall at what's thought to have been a criminal justice event, and the main suspect is thought to have been a former prisoner attending that event. My report of the day contains some distressing details and pictures. It's a crisp winter afternoon in the City of London when, just before 2 o'clock, the panic starts. Passengers filming from a bus see armed officers pointing their weapons. There's a struggle on London Bridge, and 2 of the officers go forward. Beside the melee is a man standing with a knife which he's taken from the suspect. He runs with it as armed officers shout, "Get back!" They pull away a man who's wrestling with the suspect and then open fire.
Oh my God!
There were 2 loud pops. When he was lying on the floor after the pops, he then sort of pulled his jacket back, and you could see underneath that there was some sort of vest, whether a stab vest or a explosive vest, and at that point the police officers really backed away. Of course, I was really scared at this point because we were about as close as the police officers in our bus, so yeah, that was scary.
Look, they're all moving back. Do you think...
There was more firing, and the suspect, who police say was wearing a hoax bomb, died at the scene.
I can confirm at this time, we believe a device that was strapped to the body of the suspect is a hoax explosive device.
This is mad.
The London Ambulance Service declared a major incident. At least 5 people who'd been stabbed were taken to hospital, but 2 of them died.
My heart goes out to their loved ones and to the 3 further injured victims who I understand are being treated in hospital. And of course to everybody who has been affected by today's terrible and mindless events.
The attack started in Fishmongers Hall. People attending a criminal justice event there said at least 1 woman had been stabbed. Shocked witnesses from the hall, some of them with blood on their clothes, were ushered away and driven off in a bus commandeered by police. Then the area was flooded by armed officers and other specialist teams as all the surrounding buildings were evacuated. It's 20 past 3, and normally at this time on a Friday the city is buzzing, the bars open, people starting to make their way home. But this evening it is sealed off with armed officers and officers with dogs patrolling every street. This evening, with a good section of the city still closed off, the leaders of the 2 main parties were defiant.
I think the message that we send to them and anyone associated with this type of attack is one that will be familiar, and that is that this country will never be cowed or divided or intimidated by this sort of attack, and our values, our British values, will prevail.
We have to remember that we live in a democratic society, and those that would seek to silence us will not succeed. Our democracy must be alive and vibrant.
Tonight, a full-blown terrorism investigation is underway. 3.5 weeks ago, the threat level was lowered from severe to substantial. But today, the city was reliving the horrors of the London Bridge attack 2.5 years ago. Daniel Sanford, BBC News, at London Bridge.
Well, in a moment, we'll hear from our Deputy Political Editor, John Pienaar, in Downing Street. But first, let's speak to Sarah Campbell, who's at New Scotland Yard for us tonight. Sarah, what more are police saying?
Well, the Metropolitan Police have given 2 statements here today, giving this clear timeline of events. So the Commissioner, Cressida Dick, described how the event started at Fishmongers Hall, with the police receiving the first call at 1:58 this afternoon. And then she said just 5 minutes later, City of London Police had confronted the suspect. Now, in terms of what's happening here this evening, counter-terrorism detectives, she said, would be working around the clock to identify the victims and to help their families, whilst at the same time working at full tilt, she said, to understand what happened and, crucially, whether anyone else was involved. In practical terms, in London, this does mean that those cordons around London Bridge will remain in place for some time. London, of course, very busy at the moment with shoppers and with tourists, and as reassurance, the Commissioner said that people would expect to see more police on the streets, both armed and unarmed. And anyone with any information is asked to call the anti-terror hotline.
And straight to you, John, in Downing Street. Any word yet from that Cobra meeting being chaired by Boris Johnson?
Well, we wait for word after that meeting. It's taking place behind me here at number 10. The Prime Minister in the chair, Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, he's in the meeting too. The Prime Minister has been kept fully briefed on the police operation and the latest intelligence. And his job today, since the operation itself has been running on well-planned and practiced lines with no need for political interference, he's had a big job of articulating the view of the country. So he's thanked the emergency services. He's praised members of the public who stepped in at some risk to themselves, and he articulated that message of defiance, which has been picked up by leaders of all the main parties. Now, Boris Johnson tonight has stepped back from campaigning. He'll do the same again tomorrow. The Labour Party has suspended campaigning in London this evening. But when campaigning picks up again as normal, and that will happen quickly, you can naturally expect that security and that confronting the threat of terrorism will rise higher up the election agenda in coming days.
OK, John, thank you for that. John Pienaar there in Downing Street, and Sarah Campbell at New Scotland Yard. Our security correspondent, Gordon Carrera, is here. What is the latest on the investigation into all this?
Well, initially this looked very similar to that attack on London Bridge 2 years ago, in which civilians, innocent people, appear to be targeted at random at the bridge and Borough Market. But as the day has gone on, our picture has evolved somewhat as to what might have happened today. The incident did start in Fishmongers Hall, where there was a criminal justice research meeting taking place. The person believed to be responsible is, the BBC understands, thought to be a former prisoner, and I've been told there is a connection with that event in terms of what's happened. Now, there was no intelligence, no advance warning that anything like this could have happened, although there will be questions about it. The threat level against the UK was actually brought down a level from severe to substantial at the start of the month, reflecting that they'd seen less potential attack planning and activity recently. The one thing they will think, though, is that the actual response to the attack did happen very quickly, thanks to the police, thanks to members of the public. Now it turns to the investigation, understanding all the details of that man, who I understand has been identified, understanding what motivated him specifically, whether he was targeting specific people, and crucially, whether there were any other connections and whether there is any residual threat out there. If there is, then we may see that threat level go up, but at the moment it hasn't gone up.
OK, Gordon, thank you. Gordon Carrera, our security correspondent. Our Home Affairs correspondent, Daniel Sanford, is at the scene for us. Daniel, this, of course, bringing back terrible memories of that other attack just 18 months ago on the bridge.
Yes, Clive, that's right. It was just 2.5 years ago that the London Bridge attack took place just a few hundred yards from here, and that in the same year as the horrors of the Manchester Arena, the Westminster Bridge attack and the Finsbury Park attack. And there had been a sense that we were starting to put that year of terror behind us. The threat level had been reduced from severe to substantial, and things were starting to move on. People started to feel that they weren't being hit by attack after attack after attack. And now comes another horrendous, fatal, suspected terrorist attack right in the heart of central London. And overshadowing the whole thing tonight is the fact that this suspect is a former prisoner, and I've had it confirmed just in the last few minutes that he's a former prisoner convicted of a terrorism offence, still serving his licence period after having been released from prison. And so now questions are already being asked about how we deal with the former prisoners, not least of all by the Prime Minister himself. And as we get through the next few days, that question, how do you deal with former terrorist prisoners once they've been released, I think is going to be hanging over the whole tragic affair.
OK, Daniel, thank you. Daniel Sanford, our Home Affairs correspondent there. And this is the scene at London Bridge tonight as police continue their investigations. 2 people died today and 3 others are still being treated in hospital.